Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Quisha King Show, where we discuss faith, culture, and politics, all geared towards the next generation. Before we get started, please go ahead, share this video, hit the like button, and subscribe. Please subscribe to this channel. And if you are listening, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special guest for you this week. I want to introduce you to a great mind that I just discovered, Travis Brown. Hey, Travis.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Good. So, first, what's your dog's name?
This is Nora. She likes
Hi,
a lot
Nora.
of attention. Yeah.
How long have you had her?
About 2.5 years.
Oh, what kind of dog is it?
She's a Chihuahua Terrier mix.
Oh, okay. Does she bark a lot?
Only if there are other dogs around. Other than that, she's pretty good. She doesn't really like yip at people or anything, thankfully.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Well, that's cool. We love animals around here. We have 2 cats, so
Nice.
I have become a cat lady. So
I
why
did that.
don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a filmmaker. I live just outside of Portland, Oregon. I've been a filmmaker since about 2009, 2010, and mostly making independent projects, narrative films, and more recently, over the last few years, documentaries and that sort of thing. So, lately I've just been focused a lot on the culture war stuff, just because it seems to be so front and center on a lot of people's minds, and particularly went after the woke movement to try to offer people an understanding of where this movement, where the philosophy from these ideas came from, and then I tried to offer solutions, like what people can do to push back and what they can do to sort of arm themselves against the woke ideology. So
Yeah. So before we get into, because I know I wanted to talk to you about, cults and stuff like that, and because of the work that you've done and just the things that have been on my mind. But what do you think? How do you think that America missed the attention that needed to be paid to culture? Like, why do you think we miss the sane ones of us? Because not everybody who's thinking about these things is on the right. But there are certain, the right has certainly been kind of, holding steady to what we believe, but we weren't in the culture. We were not. I think, we kind of stuck our nose up to it and was like, yeah, we don't bother with the culture stuff. So
Sure.
why do you think America as a whole, like, how did we miss that? How did we miss something so important?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems that the left, in particular the far left, has captured various institutions, including art and culture and Hollywood and all of these things, and they were able to proliferate their ideas through films and music and that sort of thing. And I think it's definitely a problem and a mistake to ignore that and to say that, well, we'll proliferate our ideas some other way. Because entertainment and movies and all of these things are just such a great way to get out concepts about reason and rationality and liberty and all these things that we seem to care about. So yeah, I don't know exactly why people sort of missed that or just didn't think it was necessary to have more of an influence there. It's a good question, but the left, especially the far left, has been really adamant about capturing those institutions and using that as a medium to spread their ideas.
Yeah, I think like Ben Shapiro says a lot of times, facts don't care about your feelings, and I think that resonates with so many conservatives and Republicans. But feelings don't care about your facts, and a lot of times, those of us who want to conserve those important things in society, we tend to be more, statistical and, the logical process and all and that's good. That's absolutely 100% necessary and good. But we do miss those opportunities to impact the heart, to touch to touch the heart, to inspire people, to make beautiful things in art and entertainment, and
Right.
interesting things like that. We definitely were like, we're kind of, we'll let the other ones handle that, and that was a big, that's not smart in any, that's just not smart to do when you're trying to uh change the heart, or yeah, change the heart of
Right.
and minds of people. You have to hit them emotionally.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm a data guy myself. I like empirical facts and data, and so I like to try to insert those into my filmmaking process whenever possible. But I also, being a filmmaker and having worked on narrative films in the past, realize the importance of narrative and the importance of drawing people in and giving them sort of an emotional journey to go through. So, like you said, it's really important to appeal to people's hearts and minds. And
Hmm.
you see what happens on the left, which is that they'll elevate subjective truth, or what they call lived experience,
Mm.
so that it becomes something more than just a personal experience. It's something almost more than that. It's elevated
Right.
beyond that, and it somehow trumps objective facts. I've got a video coming out about that pretty soon. But yeah, so I think it's
Yeah.
important to pay attention to that, and to utilize, and capture the emotional aspect of these things, as well as
Mhm.
using data to sort of balance out the narrative that we're trying to create.
Yeah. I think the most that's like the brilliant way to do it. To not be all data and not be all emotional, because that's
Right.
where you get, the extremes. But when you can combine the two and do it well, like, that's something. You can sell that.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And I think that's why, just thinking about cults, I think that's why, I know that's why, the left has been able to sell these absurd ideas,
Mm.
because on the surface, they sound good, but they are totally void of fact and reason and logic. Like when somebody says Black Lives Matter. I mean, you're like, okay, well, yeah. Like, who wants to go against the group that says Black Lives Matter?
Right. Right.
And then you have these opportunities where these charismatic leaders can then spread that message, and it does become cult like. That's my when I first got into this. I know we talked a little bit, but right after the 2016 election, my little sister and I were having a conversation about Black Lives Matter. I was totally on the left, watching CNN, thought it was real news, and she said, "Well, I like Black Lives Matter, but how come they don't show up when it's like black on black crime?" And I'm like, "Oh, what on black men are being killed all over the place, blah blah blah." And I said, out of pride, not out of really trying to foster good conversation, I was like, I'm going to go and look up the numbers and I'll get right back to you. So when I went, I looked, I was shocked. I didn't understand what I was looking at, because I don't know if you remember Hands Up, Don't Shoot, that whole lie that was being spread. There were still riots and stuff, and people were still, it was still an upheaval in the country. And I didn't understand. Like, clearly, there's more of a problem in black neighborhoods with crime than unarmed black men being shot and killed by the police. I was perplexed, and had this whole. I found Dr. Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Milton Friedman. My mind was blown. Could not believe that I had never heard of these great minds. Never. I was shocked that I had never heard of them. And then I was sitting on my couch one day, and I'm a Christian woman, and I was just praying and just thinking about everything that I had learned, and God spoke to my heart, and He said, "Your skin color has become an idol in your life."
Mm.
And like, okay, I'm supposed to be the only thing that you worship, and the only thing that you've put your race, in place of me. And I ain't cool with that, because I said, "Thou shalt not have no other gods before me." Like, I meant that when I said that. And it was life changing. It was
Mm.
life changing. I've just never been the same. And I realized if you can put something, especially if you are a believer, if you can take something and put it before, for instance, when I showed my family, how we were voting as Christians, and it was totally against what we believe biblically,
Mm.
and they were like, yeah, okay, so what? I'm like, okay, this is a cult. Like, what else can do that besides a brainwashing?
Right.
Thoughts?
Yeah, when you start, well, there's a few threads there, but when you start to put a new ideology in front of your core values, then that should raise alarms for anyone, I think,
Yeah,
regardless of what those core values are.
right.
But you mentioned "Hands Up, Don't Shoot," and of course, Shelby Steele has a great film about what killed Michael Brown. With that, the title is called "What Killed Michael Brown," and it's all
Mhm.
about that. And he calls that that narrative, which was not true. Michael Brown did not have his hands up. He was actually charging the officer, as we now know. But he
Mhm.
calls that the poetic truth. So it's something that
Mm.
sounds good and it makes people feel good and makes people feel like they can be a part of this mass movement against police brutality, for instance. That's the poetic truth because it
Yeah,
again it rings true to people's emotions, their emotional experience, their lived experience,
yeah.
and so I really liked that phrase that he coined. But yeah, and again, that just when a person can, or a person or an ideology or movement can tap into deep-seated emotions and manipulate them in a way where they're no longer paying attention to either facts or logic or their core values, and
Mhm.
there's clearly a problem there. And it happens all the time. It just so happens that the current movement that seems to be doing that the most and is the most rampant throughout our institutions, our news media, happens to be the far left.
Yeah.
So it does kind of turn into, I've often in the series that I've made, the Woke Reformation, I've
Mhm.
referred to the woke cult because I think
Mhm.
it is like a cult. I mean, you do have people sacrificing what they would otherwise believe for these really kind of novel and odd beliefs that
Mhm.
when it gets right down to it, they don't really make sense.
Right.
But again, like you said, like who could go against the phrase Black Lives Matter or
Right.
Antifa, right? Antifa just means anti-fascist. How could you possibly be against that? And so
Right.
they're so good at marketing these terms that it
Yeah.
makes it really difficult, especially anyone slightly left of center or who isn't necessarily on the right, who's maybe questioning this stuff, so they don't want to go against that, you know.
Right.
And so you have this set of like core believers who really push this stuff, the people who might be the cult leaders of this
Mhm.
sort of organized cult, and then you have the followers, and then you have people who don't necessarily believe it but want to go along with it because it sounds good, or they don't want to be
Mhm.
outed from this seemingly moral group. And so
Right.
there's a lot of different threads in terms of why people espouse these beliefs and go along with them. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the isolation, because with cults, isolation is a big part of how they brainwash. And you see that so much on the left because you dare not go against what they say. You better not ever, because they surround you, sort of with all these ideas and stuff. And if any one of you, tries to escape, you will be, we're coming for you hard,
Right.
especially if you said that you were with us, like, whew. Like, look at how they do, like, Rogan and Musk. It's like, I mean, I don't even know if Musk has ever really said, like, that I don't even think he really ever said he was political.
Right.
um but he's like, okay, yeah, a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense, and it goes against the left, and they are vicious. I mean, they're literally trying to cancel, like, his livelihood because he has a difference of opinion. And this is the top down, basically Joe Biden is saying we only have one room, we only have room for one party. And if you're not, you're an extremist. If you're not on board, you're an extremist. And so that it's, I mean, it's so obvious to me that that's like a cult. Like, that's what they do. That is exactly what they do. If you, I, I mean, they just shun you, like Jehovah Witnesses and stuff like that. If what do they call it? They call it like when they remove you from the church or whatever, they excommunicate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah. I mean, I just find it so parallel
right.
to um to the Democrat Party. I don't really know what other word fits it as properly.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, my understanding of the Democratic Party is that it's, I think there's still a lot of people who are reasonable there, but most of the narrative has been captured by this hyper vocal minority of the far left, and then you have
Mhm.
people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and others who either pay lip service to it or who go along with these ideas because again they sound good,
Mhm.
and so unfortunately they capture this seemingly capture a majority, and that it makes the whole Democratic Party look bad, and that's unfortunate. Yeah, you mentioned isolation. Interesting thing is, now we're all supposedly connected with these smartphones and social media and all of that, but what we know now about the way algorithms work, and when you like a particular video, these social media platforms want to show you the next most extreme thing to get you sort of sucked into this rabbit hole. And so you actually are kind of isolated,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is you're looking at. It sort of takes you down this rabbit hole, and you do become isolated from conflicting opinions. And that's a problem both with how the algorithms and the social media networks are structured, and it's a problem with just how people want to, clickbait and want to, increase their follower count or their platform
Right.
or whatever. So it does create these kind of silos where
Mhm.
you have people on the left and people on the right getting into these
Mhm.
particular silos, not hearing counter arguments, and that becomes a problem for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's like it's like cults on automatic, because
Right.
the algorithm is feeding you what you want to hear or what you want to see. That it gives you more of what you like and want. I mean, and theoretically, you're like, okay, well, that makes sense for a business. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to give you more of what you like.
Sure.
But when it comes to, news and media and things like that, and these bigger issues that really affect society, it's not a good thing. So
Right.
you're kind of like with the woke reformation, you're kind of like the deculter. So you are going, you are providing ways to counter these arguments and what breaking things down and what they really mean, and explaining to people, kind of like providing a way for them to break free.
Yeah, that was the hope. I like, as I mentioned, I used to live in Portland, and so most of my friends are progressives or liberals, on the left. And I used to kind of say that I was center left, but now I'm just like, nah, I'm just politically homeless. I don't
Mhm.
really care to give myself a particular label, but it was important for me to kind of like handhold liberals and progressives through the series and be like, okay, this is why these ideas are bad. This is where they come from. This is why using the word equity instead of equality matters. So I really did try to both appeal to the left and the right, but in particular walk people through who maybe absorb some of these ideas. Because if you live in Portland or any big liberal city, most people are going to absorb some of those ideas, even if they're not fully woke or fully on the left. And so it was definitely my goal to at least help deprogram the people who are at least curious, who are at least maybe a little bit skeptical
Yeah.
about like, oh, should we really be burning down these people's businesses for racial justice? And
Right.
then I have had other friends that are like, oh yeah, just burn those businesses down. As long as in the aggregate racial justice moves in the right direction, then it's fine. And for those people, it's like, okay, wow, that takes a whole nother level of deprogramming that can really
Mhm.
only happen on like a one-to-one level. But at
Yeah.
least I was hoping that with my series to get people to start to question, to start to think a little bit more critically rather than just
Yeah.
accepting this nonsense without thinking critically about it.
Yeah, I find it's tough. So I ran the Black Voices for Trump office here in Jacksonville, Florida during the 2020 cycle. And in the urban core here, we flipped Democrats to Republican 5 to 15% in some areas, which is like, wow, that's a
Yeah.
really hard thing to do. And what I found was those one-on-ones is what really it's hard to do it in a group. I found it's hard to do it in a group because these ideas are so ingrained. But also, those were the people who would come into the office or who would engage me. They were at least curious, so it was still kind of those people who were like, okay, I know something's wrong. I'm not totally buying into this. They kind of they were using the right woke lingo, but they still weren't, they just knew something was off with it. But in the end, we were able to, really increase that vote there. And having the one-on-one, it does really help. So how
Yeah.
effective has it been with the series and doing one-on-ones? Like, how are you how are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a lot of great feedback from the series, and a lot of people will message me privately and say that they're afraid to speak out about these things, but they're really glad that I'm making a series on this stuff.
Yeah.
So that was both encouraging and discouraging. It's discouraging that people don't feel more comfortable to voice their opinions more vocally, but it was encouraging to know that, like, oh, I've got a bunch of friends in this liberal bubble of Portland, in the filmmaking community and elsewhere, who actually agree with me, and
Yeah.
and a lot of them will make their voices heard publicly, which is nice. But yeah, it's hard to gauge, how many minds I've changed through the series. I've definitely had people who said that they used to be woke, and then they would start watching stuff like the content that I make, and they would slowly change their minds. And of course, I'm friends with Peter Boghossian, and I like
Yeah.
to use his tools from his book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. He and James Lindsay wrote that back in 2019.
Yeah.
And I've actually got a whole nother film really kind of based around that book. But those techniques from that book and from other books on conversations, I think, are the best way to handle those one-on-one interactions. So that's using curiosity, not shaming somebody, not actually using facts and logic in the conversation, because that usually makes a person's wall go up.
Right.
So I've studied this stuff quite a bit. I was also lucky enough to get Daryl Davis in my other film, and he's just the king of having these impossible conversations, and so he talks a lot about planting a seed of doubt. He talked to, it was something like hundreds of KKK members and got like 200 of them to leave behind the Klan. So it's a different kind of cult, but the same kind of techniques of, like, inquisitiveness, curiosity, befriending someone, even if you just can't stand what they believe, but actually using those tools and asking them why they believe what they believe, how confident they are, what would get them to change their mind. Basically, almost always framing it in terms of a question rather than preaching at somebody and telling them that they're wrong. That's generally the best way to start to shift somebody's opinion, because then later they'll go home and they'll think, oh, that was a really interesting question. Why do I think this? Sort of like when you were looking at the statistics, why do I think this? And so that is ultimately what I think helps people start to question and start to reevaluate some of the conclusions that they've come to. Because a lot of times people just come to these conclusions, or they espouse these beliefs, on whatever the belief is, on gender ideology stuff, or black people are being hunted by the cops, or whatever the belief is, and you question it and allow them to think it through, then it'll start to kind of fall apart, unless they're true dyed-in-the-wool believers, and then there's probably no way to really change their mind. But it's always good to start with questions.
If you're willing, can we do a little role play? Like, will you decult me, deprogram me? So how would you? Okay, so I'm just like, I don't know. We're at work, and I'm like, gosh, did you see the news the other day? Joe Biden is doing so much for the country, and I'm really glad he's expanding equity for America. I don't know.
So yeah, I would say, well, that's really interesting. What is equity? I'm not quite sure I understand what that means.
So, equity is just like where everybody has the same, it's like equality, but it's just equity.
Interesting. Yeah, so my understanding of equality is allowing people to have the same opportunities to achieve something in life. My understanding of equity is something more like helping people arrive at the same opportunity, or rearranging parts of society to get people into a particular place. Is that what your understanding of equity is?
I never thought about it like that, but what's wrong with, arranging society so that we're all getting the same? Like, I mean, I I don't uh, that sounds like equality to me. If everybody's the same, isn't that equality?
Yeah, I mean, there might not be anything wrong with it. It really depends, I think, on the situation. A lot of different cultures have different goals. They instill different values in people. Everyone is a unique individual, in my view, and so I don't think we're going to get necessarily equal representation in, let's say, every job, or in every aspect of society. So I then just start to wonder, does rearranging society mean discriminating against certain people so as to elevate other people?
Ooh. Well, I don't want people to be discriminated against. That's kind of why, I'm a Democrat, and I like, I want people to be equal. So I certainly don't want people to be discriminated against, but I don't really see, because America is a patriarchal, white supremacist society, we have to tear that system down in order for people to be equal, don't we, Travis?
Yeah, I guess I would need to know what a patriarchal white supremacist system, what that really means, and how do you know that we have a patriarchal white supremacist system? That's really interesting.
Because the Constitution says all men are created equal, and duh, America had slaves, so clearly it was all white men are created equal, and it was, all these white guys who've just been running everything and colonizing everything. I mean, not just in America, but everywhere. So clearly, to me, it's the white man. That's, they're just the colonizer, white supremacist, not just in America, all over the world.
Yeah, so I definitely can understand in the Constitution that people didn't live up to the goals that they put in the Constitution. But I'm curious um, if you think we have achieved some of that equality and moved in the right direction, so that more and more people, more and more groups that were disenfranchised are now actually equal through things like the Civil Rights Act and the Women's Voting Act and things like that.
Well, now it's just, they just dress it up as something else, like they like to say that we've had, all this progress. But I mean, even after slavery, there was still Jim Crow and redlining, and they burned down Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, can't you see that that is like evidence of non progression?
There's definitely a lot of tragic, and we have a lot of tragedy and a lot of racism and that sort of thing in our past. So I can certainly understand that. It's interesting about redlining. I learned not too long ago that whites are actually declined for, like, home loans, for instance, more than Asians are. And so I'm just wondering if that means there's discrimination against whites, or what do you think?
I mean, well, they're the model minority Asians. So I don't think they really count. We can't really count them because, I mean,
Gotcha.
we can't really count them. We have to just look at like black and white, because that's really what this is all about, because it's white people, all of them. And, you
Just
know,
coming back to your white supremacist patriarchal society, what do you think a society would look like that wouldn't be described that way? Like, what would be the ideal society?
where the founding was multiple, all types of people, and it where we did not have slavery, and pretty much where things were done right and proper, not where these white men were just coming and kidnapping people and bringing them over here and taking over the Native Americans land and just colonizing. I mean, they just want to take over and crush, anyone that gets in their way. And they use their white supremacy to do it. And so
Hmm.
it would need this. I won't be satisfied until we remove we tear down this society, that system of white supremacy, because I just can't see how anyone else is going, and particularly Black Americans, how they in particular would get a fair shake.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, my follow up would be something about, even if the starting conditions were terrible, and just as you described with white supremacists and using slavery to help build the country, etc., are we still there now? Are we still in that? Are we still in that same position? And some people would say yes, but
Yeah.
yeah.
What I have started to do is to remind people of all the amazing success stories, because I think far too often all you ever hear is how basically Black people, all we've done was been slaves, had Jim Crow, a little bit of civil rights, and we're still oppressed. But
Mm.
no, we do not. No one focuses enough on the amazing accomplishments. I mean, like, when you think about, here you have this group of people who were enslaved in a country, and were literally completely illiterate,
Mm-hmm.
and managed to cut that illiteracy rate in half in a generation. I think it was like 40 years, or oh gosh, I forget the stats now, but it was a very short amount of time. So
Mm-hmm.
much so that the world was noticing how fast um, those former slaves were advancing. Um, that could not have happened unless we lived in a country like America that had those documents that they were bound by the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more of those inspiring stories, more of those positive pictures of Black American history, in particular, because that's like it's like the low hanging fruit. Of course, all the equity people want to point to Black folks and basically say, like, you're pretty much, you can't even do basic things in society. You don't even know how to get an ID to vote. So I mean, we're like, what's that?
But that seems so insulting to me.
Oh, it totally is. It is very insulting.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that approach?
I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think reminding people of the great successes that individuals and groups have had, and just how they've been elevated out of whether it's slavery or Jim Crow or whatever it is, and also talking about some of those success stories, like I think both Thomas Sowell and Shelby Steele and John McWhorter to some extent also talks about this idea that, like, the Black family was more intact, before the 60s, before some of those, before the Civil Rights Act, and before some of the Great Society started to kind of make things deteriorate a little bit. But I think, talking about just, I mean, in the 20s, you had these Black-owned businesses that were very successful. You had people not only starting their own businesses, but having intact families, doing really, really well, while there was overt, open racism still in the law. I think, like, reminding people of that is, like, I wasn't even aware of that, honestly, until like a couple of years ago when I was reading about that. I was like, oh wow, there was all this and all this amazing progress, while things were still really bad in a lot of ways. There were still actual lynchings going on, and yet you have people completely elevating themselves and taking on that kind of self confidence, that sort of spirit that just allows you to build yourself up. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I did the Dr. Phil show with James Lindsay. That's where
Oh,
we had met on Twitter,
nice.
and then when we actually got to meet in person on the show, and the expert that they had brought on was talking about, how Black people are always at the bottom of this and that. And I'm just like, I said, it seems like, you really like to focus on where we're not. It seems like you're saying that we can't succeed. And he's like, me? I'm like, yeah, you. And so I said, I gave an example of, like, Black people coming into work, like he was like, that's evidence of, racism. I'm like, that's not evidence of racism just because, a group of people happen to be, there's a gap in success, anyway. And
Right.
I was like, no, we're sitting on this very show because of a billionaire Black woman. Like, Black
Right.
people have actually done some really great things. It'd be nice if you could like recognize that for a hot second.
Right.
And I think it was really surprising for Dr. Phil and the audience to hear that. And like, it got like this big applause because they're like, oh yeah, that's good.
Right. Well, part of the problem is that people like Ibram Kendi and others have pushed this idea that any disparity in outcome means it must be systemic racism. There must be something systemic, and it must be racism or discrimination. When that's just clearly not. I mean, you can read just 5 pages of Thomas Sowell and realize that like just people have different proclivities, different interests, different skill sets, and different cultures help motivate people in particular ways or not motivate people in particular ways. So it's so much more complicated than, oh, there's just one problem, it's the system, tear it down. And the other question is, well, what does it look like to tear the system down, and what do you replace it with? Like even if you want to entertain that idea as something that, I don't know, maybe it's a good idea. Is it? What would that look like? That would be another question I would ask.
Well, I think they want to replace it with themselves because I don't think it's about empowerment. It's about power. It's not about, it's just like, well, we don't want you there anymore, so we're going to put ourselves on top. And like Ibram Kendi, he's like, yes, I want to run the Department of Anti-Racism, and I will tell everyone if all your policies or are aligned with my idea of what anti-racist is. I'm just like, oh my God, like that's talk about arrogant. Like that is like, I don't know, maybe that's like narcissism, at least. I don't even know. That is pretty dang on psychotic that you're gonna be like the person who decides what is racist or not for all American policy. A whole department, Travis.
Right. And this was a person who believed that white people were aliens.
Does he really?
He did. He doesn't anymore, but he talks about it in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. In college, he goes to his dorm mate or something, and he's like, I think I figured it out why white people are so weird, because they're aliens. And he literally believed this. And this man holds a PhD and wants to become the head of the DOA, the Department of or whatever it's called, the Department of Anti-Racism. Yeah, I mean, it's he's extremely arrogant and not the brightest person in the world. Let's be honest.
Yeah, he blocked me on Twitter. It was pretty epic. When he came out with his I guess he had a baby, and he was talking about how his daughter she's already seeing these things, she can already like pick it up. I'm like, you are literally teaching your kid to be racist? Like, you are a sick person. I said, I don't want myself or my children anywhere near you or your stupid book. I didn't like that.
He wrote that children's book. What was it? Anti-Racist Baby.
Anti-Racist Baby.
Yeah.
Like, what in the, I struggle to understand. And this is, I mean, I maybe you can help me with this because you've done, like a deep dive into this woke stuff. And I don't understand how people can be so educated, but then come up with these completely illogical, don't you have to, when you're writing like your thesis or whatever you have to write to do your PhD, you have to write like all this stuff. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't have to kind of follow like a logical conclusion, but it does. Like,
yeah. Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. Probably one that we touched on earlier, which is if it's emotionally salient, then those emotions override a person's ability to be logical and think through things. And the other was, this idea that the institutions have largely been captured. And we did a great series on that with Lyle Asher and Peter Boghossian on, I think it was called How Colleges Are Becoming Cults. And Lyle talks a lot about colleges. And Lyle talks a lot about how the the higher ed schools that train teachers have been captured by far left ideology for decades, and the standards started to erode, and then just the more and more people started talking about social justice and having those kinds of goals, that was starting to betray the value of like actually producing educated citizens. And it was no longer about producing educated citizens, it's more about training people or indoctrinating people in a particular ideology. So when that happens, then you don't necessarily have to have a brilliant thesis, you don't necessarily have to be even that logical. I mean, Peter, James, and Helen proved that with their hoax studies paper.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I also think that. And so when so I don't know if you know, but I went viral for my speech against critical race theory. The governor retweeted the speech, and
Right.
that whole thing happened. And I started thinking, like, how does something like critical race theory get into America? Like, that was really perplexing to me because it's so anti-America. It's just totally not anything that's not what we do here. And I was just wondering, and I don't even know, I don't remember what the heck I typed into YouTube, but this man, John Taylor Gatto, have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't. Yeah.
So he was a high school teacher. He went to Columbia. He was a, oh God, it's what was his major? I don't, it was something like, was it economics or something? I don't know. Not one of these, like, it was a solid major. It wasn't anything like stupid. But and so he was like, okay, I think I want to teach like high school. So he goes to teach high school, and he's subbing, and they won't even let him teach typing. Now he has a degree from Columbia, but they were like, under no circumstances can you teach typing. And he's like, okay. So as he progresses in his this new career, he sees that these kids are not learning anything. They're not interested. They're not learning. They have no desire to learn. And it was like, so bizarre to him, because for him growing up, kids, they had a desire to learn. They had a desire to be better, to do more things. He was in New York as well. So he, after years of going through this, he resigns. This is like a boss move. He resigns on the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And basically said that the American public education system, he breaks it all down and says that, it was imported here through the Prussia system, through their compulsory mass education. And, we had, the Horace Mann and Johann Fichte, these people, well, Johann was already in that area, but Horseman, he went over to Prussia, studied the system, and that's how it came into America. He was like, oh my God, this is great. But that system was created to kill the imagination of the children, dumb them down so they would be minions of the state. That was the only reason it was created. And it was very successful. And so they went over, brought this system over, and I'm like, well, that's it. Like that, because that compulsory public education that we imported over here, within 10 years, the fourth people were not reading, men were not reading at fourth grade levels that they had been in the previous 10 years. And so, I mean, it took effect like really quickly. And so I'm like, that's how you do it. Like that, you can map like something like critical race theory right on top of that idea, because it's your only goal is to get these kids to worship the state. That's what they're supposed, and you have to breaking them down into different groups and things, separating them and pitting them against each other. Yeah. So it was really fascinating to me that even that's how like words and messaging and making sure that you are paying attention to the tapping into that emotion. That's how it's really effective, because it's crumbling the greatest country on the earth ever created. And it's so sad to me. It is so sad that we have so many Americans that are just buying into this stuff.
Right.
But I'm grateful for people like you who are doing things like the Woke Reformation, where you're showing us how to, combat these ideologies, how to ask the right questions, how to, prick the heart and mind of other Americans, where we can, start to gain some ground. And so I appreciate you doing, not to sound all woke, but doing the work.
Doing the work.
Yes. No, yeah, I really do. But what do you think about that Prussian system? Is that totally new to you? Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, well, Lyle talked a little bit about that in the first couple episodes of that series. So I'm blanking on some of the names, but yeah, they were
Mhm.
modeling it after the Soviet system, and
Yeah,
so very similar stuff to what he was talking about. So
yeah.
yeah, no, that's definitely true, and that's also known as the long march through the institutions. This idea of
Yes.
slowly capturing
Mhm.
institutions and heading towards Marxism. You mentioned, people. Um, being antagonistic toward one another and being separated and that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
I think of this movement, the best way to describe the woke movement to me in two words would be identity Marxism, because it really
Mhm.
takes it forwards these identities, whether it's, a gender identity, disabled identity,
Mhm.
person of color identity, whatever it is. It
Fat
tries
identity.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and it tries
Mhm.
to make them basically victims or lower. Instead of using class, they're now using identity in a broader
Yeah.
sense. Class is pretty neglected at this point, and James
Yeah.
Lindsay talks a lot about this in his book Race Marxism, where he
Mhm.
specifically focuses on CRT. But the broader picture would be it's all of these identities, and the goal is really fragment society into these victim classes and pit them against the elite classes, which are
Yeah.
often just everyday normal people that support the United States system as it is. And so yeah, it just creates a lot of conflict,
Yeah.
and and that's one of the reasons that the victim status has been elevated so much, because people have power through that victim status, and
Right.
that's part of the goal ultimately.
Yeah. I was thinking about this recently. Like there's, this whole idea that you're a victim, right? But you get so much privilege from being the victim.
Right.
And then you're talking about how all these white men in particular, are the privileged ones, when
Right.
you literally can bypass a whole um virus and march millions of you in the street and like literally defy laws and everything else. Nobody, and everybody say, just move out of your way. You are so victimized
Hmm.
that even when you get the power, you don't recognize it. Like that's a
Right.
weird. Like, so literally, if a black person is at work or something and a white person utters anything remotely, racist or sexist, whatever,
Hmm.
I mean, it's
They're be-
like, okay, you're gone. That is a lot of power. A
yeah.
lot.
Right.
Why do you think that, um not to harp on black people, but that's what it is most of the time. It's a black and white. That's what most people talk about. Why
Hmm.
do you think a lot of black people, I'm probably not even supposed to be asking you, a white man, this question, but why why would you think, what do you say about that idea that people can experience, their lived experience can literally be privilege, and they totally not even see it, that is a privilege to be able to end someone's career?
Right. That's a great question. Well, as a straight white hetero, no, I'm just kidding. Uh, yeah, this emphasis on identity, victim identity, and using that almost as like a bludgeon, like a tool for power. It's been something that's been happening quite a lot, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. And part of it is is that these ideas have proliferated through social media a lot more, and so a lot more of the culture has changed to say, well, oh, if you say anything that goes against the narrative, then you're doing harm. There's all this emphasis on care versus harm, and
Oh, yeah, you're right.
yeah, and for instance, it's not about racial identity, but Pete and I were with a group filming some stuff at Portland State University, just a thought experiment game, and I suggested that we write there are only two genders on our whiteboard, and then basically we have the students stand on a corresponding line to their belief about that question, and just ask them questions and facilitate a dialogue. And we got screamed at by people, and they came down and mobbed us. There was like 19 people just telling us how much harm we're doing and how people are going home because of these words on this whiteboard. It was just so amazing. But to work that back in towards what you're talking about having this position of power, I think they have that position because so much of the culture has changed so that, if you say anything that goes against the narrative, then you've done harm. And so no one wants to do harm, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, where some of that power comes from. And because they've identified themselves and other people have identified them as victims, just as what happened at PSU, though there were a bunch of social workers that were coming down to tell us how much harm we're doing and how these trans students had to literally go home and no longer participate in the day's classes. And I was thinking, wow, actually, you guys are doing a lot of harm because you're making these people less resilient. You're making them worse off and
Right.
victimizing them more, rather than saying they're just words on a board. You'll be okay. Let's talk
Yeah.
about this or whatever. So not only do the people themselves use their victim status as a tool of power, whether it's through an HR department or canceling someone on Twitter or whatever it is, but also you have a group of other people who may not even share the identity who are saying, yeah, this is correct, and we need to protect you. And it's there's a lot of coddling that goes on there. So there's a whole culture that's sort of set up to almost bring that victim mindset out even more and celebrate it, even if they're achieving something, with through power. So
Yeah, that is so true. That they will throw that. I mean, they get pretty uh kind of irrational with it too. Like I was on a show once with some transgender women, is it biological men, and they were, I was saying like we were talking about sports. I was like, you automatically have a natural advantage because you're a biological man, like
right.
obviously. And they're like, that kind of language gets people killed. And I'm like, killed? Really? Like, y'all are tripping hard. Like, killed. You really gonna try and tell me that somebody saying the truth gets people killed? But they do that. Josh
Yeah.
Hawley was talking to one of these crazy. She was I think she was an attorney. She was
Oh,
testifying
I
before
saw that.
Congress. Yeah, another one of these. I don't know what's up with everybody. All these crazy woke people. They have these crazy eyes. Like she's in like an AOC eyes, like all bugged out and stuff.
Yeah.
And it must like come with the package. I don't know. It's like when you sign up, that's what happens. But it was like she was saying that too. She was like, "Oh, you must want." You must want like trans people to be killed. People they're
Or kill
committing
themselves.
suicide.
Yeah.
I'm just like, that's quite a leap out the window. Like,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it gets you to stop talking. Like, okay,
Right.
so considering that's what you do, like how would you combat that? I mean, I know you said you would try to get them to see like, okay, these are just words. Like, don't let that phase you. Like, just dust. That's what we used to say back in the day. Dust it off your shoulder.
Right.
Is there something else like a tactic that you would use to combat
Yeah.
that?
It's tricky because I mean it really depends on the context. That was like there was some kind of like Senate hearing or something. I thought the
Yeah,
way that Josh Hawley handled it was pretty good. Just
yeah,
asking her pretty in a shocked way, like, "Wait, I'm caught. I'm contributing to trans people killing themselves or something
right,
like that."
right.
But clearly, with a person like that who's just obviously brainwashed, and that kind of person probably isn't going to back down or change their mind.
Yeah,
And so when you encounter people like that, I mean, those are the kinds of people we encountered at PSU, and I thought Peter did a good job. If you haven't seen the video, it's online.
Yeah.
He did a good job of questioning them and then allowing them to speak. Really, what they wanted was a confrontation, and they wanted to disrupt what we were doing. And they did for a few minutes, but we let them speak, and then we just went back to doing what we were doing. So we just had the attitude of like, all right, you can have this disruption, but we're just going to keep doing it. So the idea is like not to be scared away. And the other idea is that when people are especially closed-minded, not willing to entertain rational dialogue, there's nothing you can really do at that point. So if if there's some like legislation that you can put forth to help, enact certain policies that are useful, like keeping biological men out of women's sports or whatever, that's really what you should do. But if people are willing to engage you and they are willing to listen and ask questions as well, then you can keep the conversation going. But as soon as they start talking about suicide statistics and you must hate people and you must want people to kill themselves, then, there's just not much you can do. You can just say you don't agree, and then you can just move on because
there's nowhere to really go from there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So to sum it up, you would say, ask questions. Like when we're confronted with this stuff, we need to ask questions. Like just basically, when they are saying something to you, turn that into a question and pose it to them. That's
especially when they use these buzzwords that often they don't even know what they mean, like the word equity or inclusion or diversity. I think it's good to really clarify, okay, what do you really mean by that? And then ask them what would get them to change their mind. What would get you to change your mind on a particular belief? If you saw evidence that you needed, what would that look like? Because then that can get the person to start thinking, oh, okay, actually, if this happened, then maybe we wouldn't need equity or, what have you.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that. That's good. All right. So, gosh, this hour went by like so freaking fast. Good Lord. Well, why don't you tell everyone, what projects you're working on, where they can find you, and anything else you want to share?
Yeah. So today I just started releasing a new series of short videos called Combating Woke Myths, where I try to offer advice and questions and argumentation when people assert various woke myths, whether it's all white people have privilege or trans women are women or whatever it is. So that's coming out on my YouTube channel, and I've also got this ongoing series that we talked about, the Woke Reformation, which is longer episodes and more in depth. And people can find me on YouTube. I think it's at Become the Signal. And I also have a locals page where I have exclusive content and long form interviews with people like Peter and Douglas Murray and Ayaan Hirsi Ali and all these great people. So that's the wokereformation.locals.com. And I think that should be it.
Well, I will make sure I put all of your links in the description box below. As always, everyone, please share this video, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you for watching. And Travis, thank you for educating us and giving us some solutions on what to do when we encounter the woke revolutionaries. They can now become woke reformed.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'll see you later.